Hi, I'm your friendly neighbor at Cottage Witch Chickadee. We're going to continue our foray into what is witchcraft. Today we're going to talk about the modern witchcraft, and this is going to touch on something not quite so modern, starting in the late 19th century, and then moving on up right to today, and how witchcraft has changed, and also like what it means now. So we talked last time about how there was like a huge negative connotation around witchcraft, um, talking about the witch trials, Malleus Maleficarum, stuff like that. But eventually, witchcraft and psychic abilities became much more mainstream. So the first thing I can think of is the seances that were held during the late 19th century. And while there was still definitely some negativity thrown in there, especially with the fakes, though those who used sleight of hand and were preying on the weak and the bereaved, there were still real mediums out there like providing proper seances and still practicing witchcraft as well. Beyond that, in fact, what we talk about as witchcraft now, some of that stuff was just normal. Like alchemy is now viewed as like a witchcraft and occult thing, but that was science at the time. Or maybe like a little bit before that. I should probably have figured out like actual dates and stuff. But basically, what I'm getting at is it became more mainstream and continued to grow into being more mainstream. Of course, there were points in time where witchcraft was looked at negatively again, such as the Satanic Panic. And maybe that should be another video I do, because I don't even think I have it in my notes for this video, because it wasn't a thing, and then recently the Satanic Panic kind of came back. So maybe that's something I should do a video on. I'm thinking it's a good idea. But yeah, so the seances started off kind of being like a gray area where there were definitely mediums out there doing the right thing, and then also those who were swindling people and preying on the weak and bereaved. Beyond that, I think as society became more liberal, I'm thinking about like the 60s and like hippiedom, witchcraft kind of came back like disguised as like that new age movement. And while you might not be calling yourself a witch while you're doing new agey things, that doesn't mean that you're not using magic. And that's kind of where this gets like a little mucky, where I'm calling these videos talking about witchcraft, but really I'm talking about like a much broader idea of like magic. But because witches use magic, it's kind of like melding together for me. So I'm using it as like a generalized term, I suppose. And then I remember growing up, so we're talking about like the 90s, the early 2000s now, there being shows about mediums on the TV. On the TV. Wow, I'm an old person on that there TV. But like Sylvia Brown was like a talk show, and that was all about mediumship and psychic ability. So, basically, despite the fact that it's taken a couple of hits throughout that time, it also just continued to pick up and become more mainstream. Unfortunately, that negative connotation may never go away, and those are attached to witches for two reasons now. The first being the bad apples in the community. So these are the people that, like with any like marginalized practice, for lack of a better term, people look at the extreme instead of the general. So the extreme of this is those essential oil people who think you can, like fix cancer with, I don't know, basil oil or something. But that isn't everyone who uses essential oils. In fact, it's fewer people. They're just the ones that are brought to the eye of the public. The second is the people who will only listen to those extremes, and they won't listen to the people who are the majority of the group. They just refuse to learn. So there are people within the community and outside of it that are adding to that negative connotation of witchcraft. The other important part that I want to talk about when it comes to modern witchcraft is the way that witchcraft has allowed us to empower people. and specifically women and people of color, and of course, especially women of color. That's not to say that only women can practice witchcraft. You can be anywhere on the spectrum of gender or completely off of it and still be a witch. Also, of course, you don't have to be a person of color. There's just like a specific cultural tie to witchcraft that I think it's important to talk about, despite the fact that I'm clearly not a person of color, which is why I won't get into the details of those cultural practices. I just want to bring the empowerment to light, and basically I'm bringing these up for the reason that it seems to be that we get these surges in like new witches and new practitioners of magic around like societal upheaval. Oh man, I really went off on a tangent and now my notes don't make any sense. But basically, this empowerment comes from the idea of like taking back words and taking back power that was taken from you. So the reason that this is tied to women, we spoke about the witch trials and how most of the people who were put to death were women. And then also the cultural, of course, I'm sure there was probably racial issues like within the witch trials as well, because of course they were marginalized groups at that time as well as disabled people, which I didn't talk about in the last video, but I can almost guarantee that you were more likely to be accused of witchcraft if you were part of some sort of marginalized group. But in addition to that, specifically in the United States, witchcraft can be an empowerment for people of color. And the reason that this comes to my mind is because I think of the roots of like hoodoo, so hoodoo is, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it was adapted from magic practices from Africa by the slaves. So being able to still practice this ties you to that culture, and gives you back the power that was taken away. Of course, we're not at a point where you're not oppressed anymore. But witchcraft might be part of getting that power back and empowering yourself. And part of the reason that we're seeing a resurgence right now is the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a new resurgence of trying to fix racial inequality, and therefore there's also been a resurgence of witchcraft as empowerment and as a way to like harness the energies and work against the patriarchy as well as white supremacy and all those other big baddies. I just want to mention that I don't want to go into any specific cultural practices because I am not trained in any of them. Some of them are closed, and also I'm not a person of color, so I'm not the person you should be getting your information about them from. So please, if you do decide to do research on cultural practices, make sure the sources are coming from people of that culture. So for instance, if you want to dive into brujeria, make sure that you're getting your information from somebody from like Mexico, or if you want to learn more about hoodoo, seek out a Black practitioner who practices hoodoo and ask them if they will be your mentor. If you happen to be a person of color and you want to get in touch with the type of witchcraft that goes along with your culture, do it. Like, please, I would think it would do a lot for you, and I think if I knew my background better, learning the like cultural witchcraft of like my people would be fantastic. Because the witchcraft in Europe, even, I call myself a European mutt. The witchcraft in Europe is different from country to country, right? Like, Irish witchcraft is not the same as English witchcraft. In addition to that, I do have native blood, and I would love to get in contact with people around me who have native blood and to learn their cultural practices as well. So in addition to the empowerment of women and people of color, another reason we might be seeing a resurgence in witchcraft is because of its tie to nature and the spiritual. And the reason I think this might be a reason for the resurgence as well is the fact that we're in a climate crisis. So if we can find practices that help us give back to the earth, both in like a very tangible way of, you know, cultivating healthier practices through gardening, sustainability, which often becomes tied to the practices of witches, not always, of course, every witch's path is different. But often nature is like very ingrained in your practice in some way. So I think a lot of people have turned to natural practices and then kind of like made their way into witchcraft through that. That means that if you are a spiritual witch who works with deities, you might be working with Mother Earth herself or other natural deities. And that might be your way, along with the tangible ways to help, of course, that might be part of your way to help with the climate crisis. So I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is going to be Wicca and neo-paganism. Wicca is technically a pagan religion as well, but people generally look at it differently. So Wicca was started in the 50s by Gerald Gardner. I don't know a whole lot about it. Like I said, I am not trained in any like tradition of magic. Everything is, you know, self-taught. I read books. I do research on the internet. So I don't have a lot of information. Again, if you want to learn about Wicca, seek out a Wiccan practitioner and learn from them. Pick up books. Pick up Gerald Gardner's books and learn from those. But basically, I understand it as instead of worshipping a specific pantheon, that doesn't mean you can't be Wiccan, or like, that doesn't mean that all Wiccans don't. What am I trying to say? That doesn't mean you can't be Wiccan and also worship deities from a pantheon. But the idea is that there is like the god and the goddess, and often you like take gods from other pantheons and kind of like use them as the god and goddess, or you use the god and goddess as their triplicates, just like as they are. Again, if you're Wiccan and you want to fact check me on that, please do. Because I wasn't going to go super deep into anything specific. I didn't do a whole lot of research on it, and I'm not Wiccan myself. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was neo-paganism or paganism. I feel like a lot of people don't actually call themselves neo-pagan, and I feel like the reason for that is probably that paganism never died. Or maybe there is a difference between neo-paganism and paganism, and again, if you want to fact check me in the comments, please do. Because this video isn't specifically about those, I didn't go deeply into that research. But basically any religion that isn't Abrahamic in nature is a pagan religion. So that's why I say paganism never died. So the term pagan came about in the 4th century. It was used by Christians to describe Romans, but I think very quickly changed to be any religion that was polytheistic or any non-Christian practitioner. And I'm kind of curious if this was also for those who had no religion. Like if there was an atheist, I wonder if they would call them pagan as well, despite the fact that they don't worship any god. That's just a thought I had and thought I'd throw it in there. But yeah, that's modern witchcraft and kind of like an idea of like what it's become from what it was. The idea that it's the same practice, but it has maybe even more power behind it because of this like empowerment idea, because witches were an oppressed group and were fighting back. So if you're a practitioner of one of the specific cultural practices or Wicca or pagan or something like that, and you want to give a little bit more info down below, please do. I do plan on doing deeper dives into these things. And when I go to do one on a cultural practice, I think it would be a lot of fun, and I think it'd be really good for the community in general to interview somebody who practices, and therefore I want to be interviewing people of color. So if you're one of those people, maybe you can get in touch with me, and that would be something that we could do together, and I think that would be a really fun thing to do. As always, this is YouTube. You know what to do with that. You can also find me over on Twitch, where you can talk to me in real time. I have a Discord where, again, you can talk to me kind of in real time. I'll be on there like a fair amount. It's just a baby Discord right now, but I want to grow a community of witches and non-witches alike, as long as everybody is open-minded. It's just a place to learn and have fun and play games. That Discord isn't just for this stuff. It's for people who like to play games too, because I do that over on Twitch as well. You can find me on, I think, every social. I'm on TikTok. I have not made one because my brain doesn't do the TikTok brain. I love consuming it, but I don't know how to make one. In addition to that, all the socials, I also have a blog, so you can check me out there. It's a kitchen witchery blog specifically. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for coming and listening. Bye.